A bunch of people at Anthropic write code. And so, we made this internal tool called Claude Code. And because we ourselves write code, we have, I think a special and unique insight into, how to best use the AI models to write code. So, I think in the code space, we've become very strong competitors.
What industry do you think will get disrupted and what has a certain runway left? I'm asking from the lens of I'm trying to figure out what book to read, which college to go to, what skill set to learn. If I'm starting a startup today, what has some kind of a tailwind?
Yeah.
For a short period of time is okay as well. But
yeah,
what has
I would think about tasks that are human-centered, tasks that involve relating to people. I think that the stuff like code and software engineering is becoming more and more kind of AI focused. Things like math and science.
Is that coding or engineering? If I were to segregate coding and engineering to be two completely different things,
yeah.
Is coding going away, or is engineering element of software where you're an architect trying to figure out?
I think coding is going away first, or coding is being, done by the AI models first. And then the broader task of software engineering will take longer. But I think that is, that doing that end to end, I think that is going to happen as well, I would say. But, again, the elements of design or making something that's useful to users or knowing what the demand is or, managing teams of AI models, those things may still be present. Again, there's this comparative advantage is surprisingly powerful, right? Even if you're only doing 5% of the task, that 5% gets super amplified and levered because it's you're only doing 5% of the task. The AI does the other 95%. And so you become, 20 times more productive. Again, at some point you get to 99%, 99, and then it becomes harder. But I think there's surprisingly much in that sort of, in that zone of comparative advantage. But I would really think about the things that are human-centered. I think there's something to that. I think there's something to kind of the physical world or things that mix together human-centered, the physical world, one of those two, and analytical skills that somehow tie them together, similar to the radiologist example I gave.
So what would I study? Say I'm actual use case, I'm 25 years old. I'm trying to pick a profession for myself. I want some kind of tailwind. My outcome is a capitalistic win in the next decade. What industry would I pick outside of something which has a physical interface?
Yeah. Again, anything where you're building on AI, if AI is the tailwind, if you can be part of some other part of the supply chain, something in the semiconductor space, which, I think is, that's one example, there has an element of kind of, physical world and more traditional engineering, not software engineering. Again, the very kind of human-centered professions, that is something I would think in terms of. And I think the other thing I always say is in the world in which, AI can kind of generate anything and create anything, having basic critical thinking skills may be the most important thing to success. I worry about, these AI models that generate images and videos, and we don't make, models that generate images and videos and for many reasons, but, this is one of them. It's really hard to tell what's real from what's not. And so, a significant part of success may be having the street smarts, not to get fooled by, hopefully we can crack down on and regulate some of this fake content, but assume we can't. Critical thinking skills are going to be really important, and you don't want to fall for things that are fake. You don't want to have false beliefs. You don't want to get scammed. That's really advice that I would give to someone.
If every innovation in the history of humanity killed a core human skills, I'll give you an example. If calculators killed our ability to do arithmetic, if writing reduced the memory of human beings per se, what muscle is AI killing?
So, first of all, I'm not so sure. I still do math in my head quite a lot. I still find it useful to do math in my head, even without a calculator, just because it's it's more integrated into my thought processes, right? I might want to say, oh yeah, if like each user paid this amount, then then the revenue would be that. I want to be able to close that loop in my head without having to, to give the answer to a calculator. So I think a lot of these skills are still pretty relevant. But I would say that if you don't use things carefully, that you can lose important skills. And I think we started to see it with students where it's like they have the AI like write the essay for it. It's basically just cheating on homework. So we shouldn't do that. We did some studies around code and showed that depending on how you use the model, we can see de-skilling in terms of writing code, right? There are different ways to use the model, and some of them don't cause de-skilling, and some of them do. But definitely, if folks are not thoughtful in how they use things, then de-skilling absolutely can happen.
Do you think humans will become stupider as a race in the next decade? Because if we are, in a way, exporting thinking and cognition to systems.
Yeah, I think if we deploy, again, it's the machines of loving grace and adolescence of technology. I think if we deploy AI in the wrong way, if we deploy it carelessly, then yes, people could become stupider. Even if an AI is always going to be better than you at something, you can still learn that thing, right? You can still enrich yourself intellectually. And so that's a choice we have to make as individual companies, as individual people, and as a society overall.
When I tried to use Claude Code for the first time, I did struggle to get it to work. It was for somebody who's very stupid and has no coding or programming knowledge. It's not very, very easy. I think there's a learning curve. I heard someone say it well. It's like even prompt engineering is like playing a piano. You can't sit and start playing it. To my audience, I think it becomes increasingly relevant where to learn how to set context, how to prompt, how to use Claude Code better for somebody like me who comes with zero knowledge. Can you recommend how one does that?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I would say, we're trying increasingly to kind of like make that learning curve easier. So like one of the things that caused us to release Claude Cowork, which is basically Claude Code for non-coders, is, oh man, like we were noticing a bunch of non-technical people who really wanted to use Claude Code and were struggling through the command line terminal to do that, which, it's like coders use the command line terminal all the time, but like non-coders, it's just kind of like makes things unnecessarily complicated. So, Cowork was designed to be more of a, the kind of, it was powered by the Claude Code engine on the back, but, the idea was to kind of make it, more like user friendly and like easier to use. So, we're definitely trying to introduce interfaces that kind of make it easier. But I would also say, that there's there's like, classes you can take that, help you learn this thing. Now, I think it's a very empirical science. You mostly learn by doing, but, it's like Anthropic has its like, part of the company that we call the Ministry of Education. And, I think increasingly, we'll put out videos on how to run effective agents and how to prompt models. We've already done some of that. And I think we're going to ramp it up because, we do want everyone to be able to learn this.